The wind howled across the frozen valleys, sharp as broken glass. Snow fell in heavy sheets, covering the ground in white silence. Inside a small green tent, a human soldier named Daniel sat close to a portable heater. His breath fogged in the air even inside, showing how bitter the cold was on this planet. He had been on patrol for 2 weeks, and tonight was supposed to be just another lonely night. He did not expect visitors, especially not in this frozen wasteland. Suddenly, his ears caught something. Soft crunching noises, almost like footsteps pressing down on the snow outside. Daniel's hand moved toward his rifle without thinking. His body was tired, but his training was not. He listened carefully. The sound grew closer. A shadow moved near the flap of his tent. "Who's there?" Daniel's voice was calm but firm, his rifle already aimed at the entrance. The flap rustled. A cold gust of wind rushed in, and then she appeared. A girl. Not human. Her skin was pale with a strange silver-blue glow under the dim light. Frost clung to her long hair, which shimmered like frozen threads. Her clothes were thin, torn in places, and she shivered as if her bones were ice. Her wide eyes, large, violet, and glowing faintly, looked straight at Daniel. She did not speak. She only hugged her arms around herself, shaking. Daniel lowered his rifle slightly but did not drop his guard. "You'll freeze out there," he muttered. The girl staggered inside without permission, collapsing just near the heater. Her lips were pale, her breathing shallow, as though she had been wandering the storm for hours. Daniel watched her in silence. She was alien, clearly not from his species, but she looked weak, desperate, and lost. He thought she had come only to warm herself. After all, the cold on this planet could kill even strong soldiers within hours. Letting her stay near the heater was the humane thing to do. "Sit closer," Daniel said after a pause. His voice softened, but his eyes stayed sharp. She looked at him with something he could not read. Fear, maybe, or something deeper. Slowly, she crawled closer to the heater, wrapping her arms around herself. Steam rose from her frozen clothes as the warmth began to thaw the ice. For a long while, only the wind outside filled the silence. Daniel tried to focus on his rations, chewing on a dry piece of bread, but his eyes kept drifting to her. She was trembling less now, but still she did not speak. Instead, she kept glancing at him with those strange glowing eyes. It was not the look of someone simply thankful for warmth. There was something else, something that made Daniel's instincts itch. Finally, he spoke. "You lost no answer." She tilted her head slightly as if trying to understand his words. Then very faintly she whispered something. The sound was soft, broken, as though the language itself was heavy on her tongue. Daniel did not recognize it. Still, her tone was clear. It was a plea. Daniel frowned. He had seen aliens before in his service, but not like her. She carried no weapon, no gear, just a fragile body that looked ready to collapse. Yet the marks on her arms, dark lines that looked almost like burns or restraints, told another story. She was not just lost in the snow. Something had happened to her. He sighed and tossed her a thermal blanket from his pack. She flinched when it landed near her, but after a moment she pulled it over her shoulders. For the first time she exhaled a long, shaky breath, her body relaxing just a little. Daniel leaned back, but his rifle remained close to his side. He had learned never to trust appearances, not in the field, not in enemy territory. But something about the girl was pulling at him. She looked fragile, yes, but there was a hidden tension in her posture, as if she was holding back from doing something more. Outside, the wind screamed louder. The storm was building, a white wall swallowing the world. No one could survive out there tonight. Whether he liked it or not, the alien girl was staying. Daniel rubbed his tired eyes and muttered, "Just one night." He thought she only needed warmth, just shelter from the storm. But when her glowing eyes lifted again, meeting his with an intensity that made his chest tighten, Daniel felt an unease he couldn't explain. There was something more behind those eyes, something that told him she had not come here by accident. And as the night deepened, Daniel realized that letting her inside his tent might not have been a simple act of kindness. It might have been the beginning of something much larger, something he could not yet understand. The girl slowly leaned closer to him, her shivering fading as the heat wrapped around them. But it was not just the cold she was escaping, and Daniel, without knowing, had just stepped into a web of danger, tradition, and fate, all because he thought she only wanted to warm up. The heater hissed softly inside the tent. filling the small space with faint warmth. Outside, the storm raged louder, beating against the thin fabric like 100 fists. Daniel sat with his rifle across his knees, his eyes fixed on the alien girl wrapped in his spare blanket. She looked fragile, almost breakable, but her glowing violet eyes unsettled him. They were too sharp for someone who had nearly frozen to death. Every few seconds she glanced at him, then lowered her gaze again as if hiding something. Daniel cleared his throat. "You understand me?" he asked. His voice was low, careful. The girl tilted her head slightly, her lips moving, whispering words in a strange tongue. The sounds were soft and musical but completely foreign. He shook his head. "Yeah, thought so. No translator here." She frowned, as if frustrated that he did not understand. Then, to his surprise, she reached forward, placing her hand near the heater. Her skin was pale, almost luminous, and small scars, thin, like lines burned into her flesh, marked her wrist. Daniel's stomach tightened when he noticed them. Those weren't frost marks. Those looked like restraints. He leaned closer. "Who did that to you?" The girl froze. Her eyes darted to his rifle, then back to his face. Slowly, she pulled her hand back into the blanket, hiding the scars. Daniel sighed, realizing she would not answer. For a moment, silence returned, filled only by the roar of the storm. But then she did something unexpected. She shifted closer to him, dragging the blanket along until she was just a foot away. Her breath fogged the air between them, warm and quick. Daniel stiffened. "Hey, easy." She reached out and touched his arm lightly, her fingers trembling. He could feel the cold of her skin even through his sleeve. At first he thought it was simple gratitude, a gesture of thanks. But the way she looked at him, it was not just about survival. Her glowing eyes locked onto his, steady now, without fear. She said a single word. It was broken, heavy with accent, but clear enough. "Bond." Daniel blinked. "What?" She pressed her hand flat against his chest, right over his heartbeat, and repeated, "Bond." Daniel's mind raced. He didn't know her language, but that one word, spoken with such certainty, chilled him. Bond. What did that mean to her people? He thought she just needed heat, but this felt like something else. He gently pushed her hand away, trying not to offend her. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about."
You just stay warm, all right?
But she shook her head fiercely, pulling the blanket tighter around both of them as if trying to close the distance. Her eyes glistened, almost like she was pleading with him. Daniel leaned back, unease crawling up his spine. This was wrong. She wasn't simply lost, wasn't just a victim of the storm. She had come here for something more. But what? The heater crackled, and the storm outside screamed like a beast. The girl leaned against him suddenly, her thin frame trembling, though not from the cold anymore. Daniel froze, his rifle pressed awkwardly between them. "Why me?" he muttered, staring down at her. She whispered another word in her language, too soft to catch. Then she shut her eyes, resting her head against his shoulder as if she had finally found safety. Daniel's jaw tightened. His instinct screamed at him to push her away, to stay alert. But another part of him, the part that remembered the horrors of war and the loneliness of endless nights, kept him still. She was just a girl, alone, afraid. Maybe Bond was her way of asking for protection. Minutes turned into hours. The storm showed no sign of stopping. Daniel sat motionless, his back aching, his mind running in circles. Who was she? Why had she really come into his tent? And what did Bond mean in her world? At one point she stirred, her hand gripping his jacket tightly even in sleep. Daniel looked down at her face, peaceful now, and something twisted in his chest. She trusted him completely. But trust was dangerous out here. Trust got people killed. When her breathing finally slowed into deep rhythm, Daniel whispered to himself, "You're trouble, aren't you?" He didn't know how right he was, because outside, far beyond the storm, faint lights moved in the darkness. Not human lights, not natural. They were patrol lights searching, sweeping across the white valley. They were looking for someone, and Daniel had just given that someone shelter. The storm finally eased by morning, leaving the valley coated in white silence. The tent fabric sagged under the weight of fresh snow, but inside the heater still glowed faintly. Daniel stretched his stiff arms, blinking sleep from his eyes. He had barely dozed during the night, always half awake, his hand never far from the rifle. The alien girl was still there, curled up beside him under the blanket. Her breathing was steady now, her face softer, almost peaceful. Without the trembling, without the ice clinging to her skin, she looked different, less fragile, more deliberate. Daniel studied her carefully. He remembered her one word from last night. Bond. The way she pressed her hand against his chest. The way she clung to him as though it meant something important. It hadn't been random. She had meant it, he whispered under his breath. What are you hiding? As if she heard him, her violet eyes opened slowly. They glowed faintly in the dim light. She sat up, her movements graceful despite her exhaustion. She pointed at his chest, right where his heart was, and spoke again. Bond, she repeated firmly. Daniel frowned. Yeah, you said that before. Still don't know what you mean. She tried again, this time pressing her hands together, then placing one hand on him and the other on herself. She held the pose, staring at him with determination. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You're saying, you and me? Together? The girl nodded once. Her lips trembled as she added a string of words in her language, melodic but sharp, her tone almost ceremonial. She looked at him as though waiting for an answer. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, you don't understand. I'm human. He paused, searching for the right word. You're not. Her eyes flickered with something close to anger or maybe desperation. She grabbed his wrist suddenly, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so thin. Then she guided his hand and pressed it against her chest over her own heartbeat. Daniel stiffened, caught off guard. Her heart raced beneath his palm, beating fast like a trapped bird. She whispered again, voice low but clear. Bond. Daniel pulled his hand back, unsettled. All right, I get it. But where I come from, we don't just... He stopped himself. He wasn't sure how to explain human customs to her, not when he barely understood hers. Before he could say more, a sharp sound outside broke the moment. A faint whine in the air. Daniel froze, recognizing it instantly. Drones. He shoved the blanket off and moved to the tent flap. Pushing it open slightly, he peeked outside. His heart sank. Through the thin veil of snow, several small aerial drones hovered in the valley, their red sensors scanning the ground. Farther in the distance, faint shadows moved against the white, figures tall and armored trudging through the snow in formation. Daniel cursed under his breath. They weren't human. They were looking for someone, and he already knew who. He turned back to the girl. She sat still, her expression calm in a way that unnerved him. As if she had expected this all along, Daniel hissed, They're here for you, aren't they? She didn't answer in words. Instead, she gave the slightest nod. Her glowing eyes met his, and this time there was no fear, only resolve. Daniel's pulse quickened. Why, who are you? The girl drew a shaky breath, then lifted the edge of her sleeve. The scars on her arms were clearer now in the morning light. Dark lines etched into her skin, not random but patterned. Symbols burned like brands. Daniel stared. He had seen enough to understand. Prisoner, he muttered. Or worse. She nodded again, then tapped her chest, whispering something soft. The word was long, layered, impossible for him to follow. But the way she said it, her voice heavy with meaning, made him realize it was her name. He tried to repeat it, stumbling on the sounds. She smiled faintly, shaking her head, then reached out and touched his face gently. Human, she said, as if giving him a name in return. For a moment, the storm, the drones, the hunters outside, all of it faded. There was only that strange connection, fragile but undeniable. She had chosen him for something, though he still didn't know why. But the moment shattered when a beam of red light swept across the tent. One of the drones had locked onto the area. Daniel grabbed his rifle instantly. Time to move, he muttered. He reached for his pack, slinging it over his shoulder. The girl stood quickly, still weak but steady enough to follow. She clutched the blanket like a cloak and moved beside him closer than necessary. Daniel pushed through the flap, snow blasting his face. The drones buzzed louder now, red beams crisscrossing the valley. The armored figures were drawing closer, their weapons ready. Daniel gritted his teeth. He had thought the girl only wanted warmth, but now he knew better. Bond wasn't about heat. It was about survival, about trust, maybe even about destiny. And whether he wanted it or not, he was now part of it. Snow crunched under heavy boots, the sound sharp in the morning silence. Daniel's heart pounded as he crouched behind a snowbank. The alien girl pressed close beside him. The drones hovered in wide arcs, their red beams sweeping across the white ground like searchlights. Every time the light neared them, Daniel pulled the girl lower, praying the snow cover was enough to hide their heat signatures. The girl's violet eyes flickered with fear, but she did not panic. She stayed quiet, her breathing controlled, her hand gripping the edge of his jacket tightly. Daniel found himself whispering, "Stay down. Don't move." Through the swirling snow, he finally got a clear look at the hunters. There were 6 of them, tall, armored figures, their suits dark and heavy with strange markings. Their helmets glowed faintly, and each carried a weapon shaped like a spear but crackling with energy. They moved with precision, spreading out in a search pattern. Daniel narrowed his eyes. These weren't random soldiers. They were trackers, specialized units trained to find prey no matter where it hid. And their prey was sitting right beside him. The girl whispered something in her own tongue, her voice trembling. Daniel shook his head. "I don't understand you, but I get the point. They want you back." She looked at him, her expression hardening. Then she pressed her palm against his chest again. "Bond," she said firmly, as if reminding him. Daniel muttered under his breath, "Yeah, I got it, Bond. Guess that means I'm in this mess with you." The nearest drone buzzed closer, its sensor beam sliding across the snowbank. Daniel's jaw tightened. He couldn't wait any longer. With quick precision, he raised his rifle, aimed, and fired a short, controlled burst. The drone shattered in midair, sparks flying as it crashed into the snow. The valley erupted instantly. The hunters turned sharply, their weapons glowing as they spotted the smoke trail. The other drones whirred louder, converging on the source. Daniel cursed. "Well, so much for hiding." He grabbed the girl's wrist and pulled her to her feet. "Run!" They sprinted across the snow, boots slipping on the ice. The girl stumbled once, but Daniel caught her and pulled her along. Behind them, beams of energy hissed through the storm, striking the ground and sending snow exploding into the air. The hunters shouted in their guttural language, their voices echoing across the valley. Daniel zigzagged, dragging the girl toward a cluster of ice ridges that could provide cover. His lungs burned from the cold air, but he didn't stop. A spear of energy struck the ground just a few feet from them, blasting open the snow with a violent hiss. The girl screamed softly, clutching him tighter. Daniel fired back over his shoulder, forcing the hunters to duck behind their armor shields. Finally, they slid into the cover of the ice ridges. Daniel pressed his back against the frozen wall, chest heaving. The girl leaned against him, her face pale but her eyes glowing fiercely. "We can't outrun them forever," Daniel muttered. He checked his rifle, half a magazine left. Not nearly enough. The girl touched his arm and whispered urgently, pointing to a narrow crevice between the ice. Daniel frowned. "In there? That's barely wide enough." But her expression was firm, desperate. He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, go." She slipped inside first, her small frame vanishing into the darkness. Daniel followed, squeezing his shoulders through the tight passage. The ice scraped against his gear, but finally, the path opened into a hidden cave. Inside, faint blue light glowed from crystals embedded in the walls. The air was warmer, almost breathable compared to the storm outside. Daniel blinked in surprise. "Well, this is new." The girl turned to him, her face tense. She whispered a long sentence in her language, then repeated one word in broken English. "Sanctuary." Daniel exhaled. "Sanctuary, huh? For now, maybe." He crouched low, listening. The hunters' footsteps echoed faintly outside the crevice. They were close, but the narrow opening made it hard for them to enter without exposing themselves. For a moment, Daniel allowed himself to breathe. But he knew this was temporary. They would find a way in eventually. The girl sat on the ground, her hands trembling as she traced strange symbols in the frost. They looked similar to the scars on her arms. Daniel watched carefully. "That's not random, is it? That's your language." She looked up, meeting his eyes, and nodded slowly. Then she pointed to herself, spoke her name again, and repeated the word Bond. Daniel ran a hand down his face. "I don't know why you picked me. I don't even know what this bond means for you. But if it keeps you alive, fine. I'll play along." Outside, the hunters shouted. One of them slammed his weapon against the ice wall, testing its strength. Daniel raised his rifle again, ready for the worst. The girl crawled closer to him, placing both hands on his chest this time, her eyes glowing brighter than before. She whispered something long and urgent, and even though he couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. She was trusting him. Completely. Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle and muttered, "All right then. Let's show them humans don't go down easy." The hunters' shadows grew larger outside the crevice. The fight was coming, and Daniel knew this was no longer just about survival. It was about the bond that had already begun to change everything. The cave walls shimmered faintly with blue crystal light, casting long shadows across the frozen floor. Daniel knelt near the narrow entrance, rifle steady, listening to the hunters outside. Their heavy boots crunched against the snow, their guttural voices carrying through the icy air. He knew they wouldn't give up. They were trackers, patient, relentless. Behind him, the alien girl sat cross-legged, her blanket draped around her shoulders. She looked calmer than he expected, almost as if she had known this moment would come. Daniel glanced back at her. "You're not just some lost traveler, are you?" Her glowing violet eyes met his, and slowly she shook her head. Daniel sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Figures." The girl touched the scars on her arm, tracing the burned symbols as if gathering courage. Then she pointed to herself and spoke a long phrase in her language. Daniel couldn't understand, but her voice was firm, almost royal. She ended with a word she had repeated before. "Bond." He frowned. "You keep saying that, Bond, but I need more. Who are you really? Why are they after you?" The girl hesitated, then stood shakily and walked toward the crystals on the wall. She pressed her palm against one, and suddenly the entire surface lit up with faint glowing lines. Symbols appeared, etched in light, similar to the scars on her skin. Daniel's eyes widened. "What the hell?" She turned back to him and pressed her chest with one hand. Then in halting English, she forced out 2 words. "Princess." "Exile." Daniel froze. The word struck him like a bullet. "Princess?" She nodded, eyes heavy with sorrow. The truth sank in slowly. She wasn't just some refugee. She was royalty. And the hunters outside weren't simple soldiers. They were executioners, sent to erase her existence. Daniel lowered his rifle slightly. "So that's it. You ran away, and they want you dead before anyone finds out." The girl's lips trembled as she spoke in her own tongue, gesturing at her scars. Daniel understood enough. Those marks weren't just restraints. They were punishments, reminders of betrayal. She stepped closer, lifting her hand to touch his chest again. "Bond," she whispered, her voice softer this time. Then she placed her hand over her own heart. "Life, death." Daniel stared at her, realization dawning. She wasn't just clinging to him for warmth. She was binding herself to him by some ancient tradition. He had saved her, and now she was his responsibility, at least in her eyes. But responsibility was dangerous. Daniel shook his head slowly. "Listen, I don't know your politics. I don't know your enemies. I just know I'm one guy with one rifle. If I keep you with me, I'll have the whole damn galaxy on my back." Her eyes softened. Shimmering with tears she refused to let fall. She spoke again, her words broken but clear enough. "You." "Safe. You. Only one." Daniel's chest tightened. She wasn't asking. She was declaring it. A loud crash outside cut through the silence. One of the hunters slammed his weapon against the ice again, testing its strength. The cave shuddered. Snowdust rained from the ceiling. Daniel cursed under his breath. Time was running out. He looked at the girl again. "Why me? Out of everyone, why did you come into my tent?" She hesitated, then spoke slowly in English, the words rough but understandable. "Because heart." "Strong." Daniel blinked. He didn't know what to say. Maybe she had chosen him by instinct. Maybe fate had shoved them together. Either way, the hunters outside were proof that this bond had consequences. The girl stepped even closer, her eyes burning with a strange fire. She whispered one last word, heavier than all the others. "Empire." Daniel frowned. "Empire? Don't tell me." She nodded grimly. "Weakness, secret." She tapped her temple, then pointed outside toward the hunters. "They silence me." The weight of her words hit him like a hammer. She knew something that could break her people's empire. That was why they were hunting her. That was why she had scars, why she had been marked for death. Daniel exhaled sharply. "So I'm protecting not just a princess, but a secret that could tear down an empire." The girl lowered her head, ashamed, but her hand found his again, gripping tightly. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He could walk away, leave her, let the hunters finish their job. That would be the safe choice. But when he looked at her, fragile yet unbroken, afraid yet still fighting, He knew he couldn't. He opened his eyes, determination burning there. "All right, princess. If they want you silenced, then I guess I'm making some noise." The girl's lips curved in the faintest smile. She whispered again with all the strength she had. "Bond." Outside, the hunters prepared to breach the cave. Inside, Daniel braced himself, rifle ready, heart steady. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was stepping into a war he didn't yet understand. And it all started because he had let a stranger into his tent. The ice cave trembled again as the hunters outside hammered their weapons against the walls. The sound echoed like thunder, shaking loose shards of crystal that clattered onto the frozen floor. Daniel tightened his grip on the rifle, his muscles tense, his eyes locked on the narrow entrance. He knew it was only a matter of time before they broke through. The alien girl, princess fugitive bondmate, watched him closely. Her violet eyes glowed brighter in the crystal light, her lips pressed tight. She didn't beg, she didn't cry. Instead, she placed her hand on her chest, then on his arm. "Together," she whispered. Daniel let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah, together. Until we're both dead." But something in her gaze silenced his doubt. She believed in him fully, without hesitation. And that belief dug into him deeper than any weapon could. The hunters shouted outside, their guttural voices rising in unison. Then silence fell, deadly heavy silence. Daniel's instinct screamed. He raised his rifle just as the wall of ice exploded inward. The first hunter charged through, spear crackling with blue energy. Daniel fired 3 shots, the bullets striking the armor. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Daniel rolled aside as the spear stabbed down, melting a hole into the ice where he had been standing. The girl shrieked a warning, throwing a shard of crystal she had broken from the wall. It struck the hunter's helmet, distracting him for a moment. Daniel took the chance, aimed for the exposed joint between neck and armor, and fired. The shot pierced true. The hunter collapsed, sparks flickering from his weapon. Daniel's chest heaved, adrenaline burning through him. "One down," he muttered, but more shadows loomed in the entrance. 2, 3, 4 hunters pushing in, their glowing eyes fixed on the pair inside. The girl pressed her hands together, then slammed them onto the floor. To Daniel's shock, the crystals around her flickered and pulsed with light. Lines of strange energy crawled across the walls, glowing brighter. "What are you doing?" Daniel shouted over the noise. She whispered urgently, her words too fast for him to follow. But the meaning was clear. The cave was alive with some ancient power, and she was calling it. The hunters roared and advanced. Daniel opened fire, bullets sparking off armor, slowing them but not stopping them. The girl cried out, the crystal light surging until the whole cave glowed. A shockwave burst outward, knocking 2 hunters off their feet. Daniel's jaw dropped. "You've been holding out on me." She looked back at him, face pale with effort, sweat on her brow. "Bond." "Strength," she gasped. He blinked, realization cutting through the chaos. She wasn't just drawing on the cave, she was drawing on him. The bond between them was giving her power. Daniel gritted his teeth, firing at another hunter while shouting, "Then use whatever you've got. We don't get a second chance." Together they fought, human and alien, side by side. Daniel used his rifle, his training, his reflexes, while the girl bent the crystal light into shields and bursts of energy. Every time he covered her, she answered with more power, their movements slowly sinking as if they had fought together for years. But the hunters were relentless. One slashed at Daniel with its spear, the energy grazing his arm and burning through his sleeve. Pain seared, but he refused to drop his weapon. The girl screamed his name, or something close to it, and hurled a wave of light that sent the attacker flying into the wall. Daniel staggered, clutching his wound, but managed a grim smile. "Guess we make a good team." The girl knelt beside him for a moment, placing her glowing hand over the burn. Heat spread, not painful but soothing, the wound closing slightly. Daniel stared in disbelief. "You can heal too?" She shook her head, exhausted. "Not heal. Share." Daniel realized the truth. She was taking some of his pain into herself, lightening his burden. The bond wasn't just symbolic. It was real. Another hunter charged, roaring in fury. Daniel stood again, rifle raised, the girl at his side. Together they unleashed everything, bullets, light, willpower. The last of the hunters staggered, fell, and finally lay still in the frozen cave. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel lowered his rifle, chest heaving, sweat freezing on his skin. The girl collapsed beside him, her body trembling from exhaustion but her eyes still burned with fierce determination. Daniel knelt, pressing a hand gently to her shoulder. "You did it. We did it." She looked up at him, whispering one word with all the strength she had left. "Bond," Daniel exhaled slowly. He hadn't wanted this, hadn't asked for it. But now he understood. This bond was more than a ritual, more than a tradition. It was survival. It was trust. And maybe, just maybe, it was destiny. Outside, the storm had faded, leaving the world silent again. But Daniel knew this wasn't the end. The hunters they killed were only the beginning. The Empire would not stop. He looked down at the alien princess, fragile yet unbroken, and felt the weight of the choice pressing harder than ever. Protecting her meant defying an empire. Walking away meant betraying the bond. And Daniel already knew which path he would take. The cave floor was littered with broken armor, sparking weapons, and the still bodies of the hunters. Steam rose faintly from melted ice, the air heavy with smoke and crystal light. Daniel leaned against the wall, his arm bandaged with strips of cloth torn from his pack. His chest still heaved from the fight, but his eyes stayed sharp. Beside him, the alien girl, princess of a fallen line, rested weakly, her body drained, but her violet eyes glowing with stubborn fire. She had fought with everything she had, using the bond between them as her strength. Now she sat quietly, watching him with a gaze that carried both gratitude and fear. Daniel broke the silence first. "They won't stop. You know that, right? More will come." The girl nodded slowly, her lips trembling. "Empire, never stop." She hesitated, then added in halting English, "If stay, you die." Daniel gave a tired laugh. "Story of my life." He shifted closer, lowering his voice. "Tell me the truth. That secret you carry. What is it?" Her eyes darkened. She placed a hand on her chest, then tapped the symbols branded into her arm. "Weakness," she whispered. "Empire heart. Broken." Daniel's brow furrowed. "You mean, you know how to destroy them?" She nodded once, firm despite her exhaustion. "Yes, but if they know, I'll die." The weight of her words hung heavy in the cave. Daniel understood now. She wasn't just a runaway. She was a living weapon against her own people. Her very existence was a threat to their empire. That was why they hunted her with such fury. Daniel rubbed his temples. He was a soldier, trained to follow orders, not to topple empires. Yet here he was, with the power to change the galaxy sitting beside him, bound to him by a word he barely understood. The girl reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "Bond," she whispered, her voice fragile but steady. "Not choice, fate." Daniel stared at her, conflicted. He could walk away, leave her, let the Empire erase her and live his life in peace. But deep down he knew he couldn't, not after everything. Not after she had trusted him completely, given him her strength, fought at his side. The sound of engines rumbled faintly in the distance. Daniel's head snapped up. Through the cracks of the cave wall, faint shadows moved again. Larger this time. A dropship. Reinforcements. The girl's face paled. She clutched his sleeve tightly, her eyes wide with fear. More come. Too many. Daniel took a deep breath. His decision weighed heavy, but it was clear. Then we don't run. Not this time. The girl blinked, confused. Daniel smiled grimly. We fight smart. We fight human. He began setting traps quickly, placing grenades under chunks of fallen ice, rigging tripwires from his limited supplies, positioning broken hunter weapons to explode when disturbed. The girl watched in amazement as he worked. She whispered, "You..." "Clever," Daniel smirked. "That's what we do. When we can't win with strength, we use our brains." Minutes later, the dropship thundered down outside the valley, its engines blowing snow into violent swirls. Dozens of armored hunters poured out, their weapons glowing, their voices booming in unison. They marched toward the cave with perfect formation, expecting an easy kill. Daniel crouched low, rifle ready, eyes hard. The girl knelt beside him, her hands glowing faintly as she prepared the crystal light again. The hunters stormed into the cave, and the first trap triggered. Explosions ripped through the ice, collapsing part of the ceiling and crushing several under tons of frozen rock. Daniel opened fire, bullets striking weak points, forcing the hunters into disarray. The girl unleashed a wave of crystal energy, blinding them with light, their armor flickering with static. Together they moved as one, his precision and cunning, her power and resilience. The fight was chaos, but this time Daniel wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting for something larger. Her freedom, her secret, and the bond they now shared. Hours later, silence returned once more. Smoke filled the cave, the air thick with the stench of battle. The hunters lay defeated, their dropship abandoned outside. Daniel leaned heavily on his rifle, exhaustion threatening to crush him. The girl touched his arm gently, whispering, "Human. Win." Daniel gave a tired grin. "No, we win." She smiled faintly, tears finally breaking free. For the first time, her expression softened completely, free of fear. She whispered the word again, not as a plea but as a promise. "Bond." Daniel placed a hand over hers. "Bond," he repeated. And this time he understood what it meant. They weren't just survivor and fugitive. They were partners, allies, family even. Outside, the storm cleared, revealing a sky painted in pale light. For the first time since she had stepped into his tent, Daniel felt the weight of destiny pressing forward. He turned to her. "Your secret can change everything. The Empire fears you, which means we hold the advantage." The girl nodded slowly, her eyes glowing with renewed strength. Daniel raised his rifle, slung it over his shoulder, and faced the open valley. "Then let's go change the galaxy." And with that, a simple choice to protect one girl on a frozen night became the spark of something greater. The human and the alien princess walked side by side into the unknown, their bond stronger than any empire, their path uncertain but unbreakable, because one man had made a choice, and that choice changed everything.